Dirty old town. As I cautiously eased my head through the narrow, jagged opening, my eyes strained against the enveloping darkness, searching for any flicker of danger in the oppressive silence. To my astonishment, I found myself standing within the hollow, musty confines of an ancient wooden barrel, its splintered staves pressing faintly against my shoulders, the air thick with the scent of damp oak and stale grain. What I had mistaken for a rusted drain cover was, in truth, the barrel's weathered lid. Its edges warped and crusted with grime, now tilted slightly above me, admitting a sliver of pale light. Once again, Ogleflow, my enigmatic and elusive guide, had vanished without a whisper, leaving me to navigate this bizarre predicament in solitude. I crouched low, my knees brushing the barrel's rough interior, sinking just far enough to peer over its splintered rim, my breath catching in my throat. A luminous full moon hung like a polished silver coin in the velvet night sky, casting an ethereal glow over a deserted cobblestoned street below. The stones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, glistened like a river of molten glass, their surfaces slick from a recent downpour that left the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and stone. The street unfurled before me, a winding ribbon flanked by rows of gnarled, dark, wooden-beamed houses, their lattice-style windows glinting like the eyes of watchful sentinels under the moonlight. The buildings leaned inward, their timbered facades warped and twisted, evoking a memory of a Tudor house I'd once glimpsed in a dog-eared magazine, its grandeur tinged with an unsettling melancholy. The cobblestones shimmered, reflecting the moon's radiance in fractured, dancing patterns, while wisps of mist curled lazily from the ground, weaving through the shadows like ghostly fingers. The air was sharp and crisp, carrying the clean, invigorating scent of rain-soaked earth, yet it sent a shiver racing down my spine, as if the night itself were whispering warnings. The town slumbered beneath a suffocating blanket of darkness, its timber-framed buildings casting long, jagged shadows that clawed at the ground in the flickering light of a few dwindling lanterns, their iron frames creaking softly in the breeze. From the labyrinthine alleyways that snaked between the houses, the mournful hoot of an owl reverberated, its cry mingling with the faint skittering patter of rats scurrying across the sagging thatched rooftops, their claws scratching against the straw. The silence was a fragile veneer, broken by the distant raucous laughter of late-night revelers spilling from a tavern hidden deep within the town's shadowed heart, their voices slurred and discordant, swallowed quickly by the oppressive quiet. Beyond the faint glow of the main street, the darkness thickened, a palpable force that seemed to consume the maze of alleys and cramped refuse-strewn yards. The air grew heavier there, laden with the sour tang of rotting wood and the faint, acrid bite of smoke from dying hearths. A sudden gust of wind tore through the street, rattling loose shutters and sending a cascade of leaves skittering across the cobblestones like startled insects. For a fleeting moment, the town felt utterly forsaken, an isolated outpost of flickering firelight adrift in an endless sea of night, its edges fraying into the void. The fragile quiet shattered as a pack of mangy dogs erupted into snarls at the street's far end, their guttural growls and piercing yips bouncing off the stone walls like a chorus of demons. Their shadows writhed in the moonlight as they fought ferociously over scraps scavenged from a toppled bin, their teeth flashing and fur matted with filth. My heart thudded painfully, and I sank deeper into the barrel's dank embrace, my fingers clutching the rough wood, desperate to remain unseen. The barrel's interior was cold, its walls slick with condensation, and the faint creak of its staves seemed deafening in my heightened state of fear. After an agonizing eternity, the dogs' brawl ceased, their barking fading into the distance as they tore off into the night, leaving the street cloaked in an uneasy hush once more. I risked another glance over the barrel's rim, my pulse hammering in my ears as I feared the dogs' commotion might have roused the town's slumbering inhabitants. To my relief, the street remained desolate, the houses standing like silent monoliths, their windows dark and unyielding. I was about to hoist myself out, my muscles tensing for the effort, when a rough hand seized my collar with brutal force, yanking me upward so violently that my feet dangled above the ground, the barrel tipping precariously with a hollow thud. A burly man loomed over me, his breath hot and sour with ale, his movements erratic as he shoved and pulled me, making it impossible to find my footing on the slick cobblestones. "What you doing, boy? Why you hiding in that barrel?" he growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble that seemed to vibrate through the night air, his silhouette framed ominously against the moonlit street. I was struck mute, my tongue paralyzed by fear, my mind racing as the world spun around me. The street's shadows seemed to pulse, the houses leaning closer, their timbered beams groaning faintly as if in judgment. "You a thief, boy? You out here thieving?" he snarled, his grip tightening until the fabric of my collar bit into my skin. He abruptly halted his assault, though his hand remained a vice on my collar, pinning me in place. Gathering my wits, I dared to look up at him, my eyes meeting his bloodshot, red-rimmed glare, which burned with suspicion and contempt. His face was a map of hardship, weathered and creased, framed by a long, unkempt beard that hung in tangled greying strands. A wide-brimmed black hat, its edges frayed, sat low on his brow, a single tattered feather tucked into its band, fluttering in the breeze. His clothes were rough and patched, crafted from coarse wool and worn leather, the seams strained and stained with years of grime. A heavy woolen cloak, damp from the night's mist, draped over his broad shoulders, and his knee-high leather boots, scuffed and caked with mud, creaked with each shift of his weight. In his free hand, he clutched a flickering lantern, its weak flame casting harsh, shifting shadows across his craggy features, illuminating the glint of a stout club and a dagger tucked into his belt, their handles worn from use. "Answer me, boy," he bellowed, the lantern swaying, its light dancing wildly across the cobblestones. "I'm not a thief," I cried, my voice trembling, barely audible against the wind's low moan. "What's your name, boy?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing. "Finn," I stammered, my throat dry. "Finn, is it?" he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "I've been the night watchman here for 20 years. Why haven't I seen you before? Are you an orphan?" "Yes. Yes, I am. I am an orphan," I blurted, clinging to the truth as a lifeline, though my heart pounded with guilt. "Orphans are beggars and thieves," he spat, his lip curling in a sneer, his breath clouding in the chilly air. "I'm not a thief," I insisted, my voice cracking as desperation clawed at me. "We'll let the magistrate decide what to do with you. Can't have you running around loose thieving," he declared, his words final, echoing off the silent houses. "I'm not a thief," I protested, but my cries were swallowed by the night as he dragged me roughly through the cobblestone streets, the stones slick and treacherous underfoot. The houses loomed like spectres, their darkened windows reflecting the lantern's feeble glow, their timbered frames creaking in the wind as if whispering accusations. The watchman grumbled incessantly, his voice a low, resentful drone. Complaints of his thankless role, of nights spent patrolling these haunted streets, of a life that offered no reprieve. His words carried a lonely weight, painting him as a pitiful figure, unloading his burdens on me because I was the only one there, a captive audience to his misery. I pleaded with him to release me, swearing my innocence, but he ignored me, his grip unrelenting as we approached a small black wooden door, its surface scarred and pitted as if bearing the wounds of the town itself. He hung his lantern on a rusted hook protruding from the damp stone wall, the light casting eerie shadows that danced like spectres. Fumbling with a heavy ring of keys at his belt, he selected one, its metal glinting dully. The lock clanked loudly, the sound reverberating through the empty street, and he shoved the door open with a groan of rusted hinges, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. Forcing me inside, he held me in place with one hand while locking the door behind us. The click of the bolt like a hammer striking an anvil. The air was cold and dank, thick with the nauseating stench of sewage, mildew, and something sharper, like despair itself. "Please let me go. I'm not a thief, honestly." I made one final desperate plea, my voice echoing in the stone-walled corridor. He smirked, his yellowed teeth glinting in the lantern's flickering light. "Honestly?" he mocked, his voice dripping with scorn. "How can a thief be honest?" "But it's true," I begged, my words barely a whisper, lost in the oppressive atmosphere. Ignoring me, he shoved me toward a dimly lit room at the corridor's end, where two cells stood, their rusted iron bars glistening with condensation. The stone floor was slick with grime, and the air was heavy, each breath tasting of decay. In the first cell, a figure slumped on a splintered wooden bench, head resting against the bars, his soft snores barely audible. The watchman unlocked the second cell and thrust me inside with such force that I stumbled, crashing face first onto the cold, filthy floor, the impact jarring my bones. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking with a chilling finality. I scrambled to my feet, pleading once more, but he only flashed a cruel smile, his lantern casting long shadows as he turned and left, his boots echoing down the corridor until silence reclaimed the space. Trembling, I surveyed my cell, a cramped, miserable prison of damp stone and iron. A rough wooden bench, its surface scarred and uneven, was bolted to the back wall, and a rusted bucket sat in the corner, its purpose clear and revolting. The air was thick with the smell of mold and despair, the walls slick with moisture that glistened in the faint light filtering through a high, barred window. The man in the neighboring cell remained motionless, his snores a soft counterpoint to the dripping of water somewhere in the darkness. "Where are you, Ogleflow?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, laced with frustration and a creeping sense of abandonment. I turned and my heart lurched as the man in the next cell now stood, his gaunt face pressed against the bars, his rheumy eyes glinting like tarnished coins. I gasped, stumbling backwards, my back pressing against the damp wall. He was ancient, perhaps in his 80s, his frail frame swaying as he clung to the bars for support, his tattered clothes reeking of stale beer, old leather and unwashed flesh. His breath rasped, and his hands trembled, the knuckles gnarled and white from his grip on the iron. "Ogleflow, you say," he mumbled, his voice slurred and raspy, as if dredged from the depths of a drunken stupor, yet carrying an eerie weight. I froze, startled that he knew the name, the air in the cell seeming to thicken with an unspoken presence. "Yes, Ogleflow. Do you know him?" I asked, my voice cautious, my pulse quickening. Ogleflow, the enigmatic and wise mentor figure that exudes an otherworldly presence, he said, his words surprisingly lucid, cutting through the haze of his intoxication. Whose shimmering, iridescent skin glows faintly in the dark, like a living gemstone, casting prisms of light that dance on the walls. "Well, yes, I guess so," I replied, unnerved by the vividness of his description, as if he'd seen Ogleflow himself. "Does he have a calm demeanor and cryptic wisdom, hinting at a vast ancient knowledge? Does he speak with deliberate care, often using metaphors to guide you towards self-discovery rather than offering direct answers?" he continued, his voice gaining a strange melodic cadence, his eyes distant yet piercing. "That definitely sounds like him," I admitted, my suspicion giving way to a reluctant curiosity, the cell's oppressive atmosphere seeming to pulse with his words. "Is he taking you on a transformative inner journey, helping you confront fears, clear mental blockages, and grow in maturity and self-awareness?" he spluttered, a faint, knowing smile tugging at his cracked lips, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Do you know him?" I pressed, desperate for clarity, the damp stone at my back grounding me in the moment. "He is known to me," he said cryptically, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper, as if the walls themselves might overhear. "But another seeks you too." "What do you mean, another?" "Who is looking for me?" I asked, my stomach tightening, the air growing colder, heavier, as if the shadows were listening. "A flochi, one who opposes Ogleflow, a would-be figure of chaos and manipulation, embodying fear and confusion. He will poison your mind with self-doubt," he said, his eyes narrowing, his words hanging like a curse in the dank air. "What does he want with me?" I asked, my heart racing, the cell's walls seeming to close in. "His name is Ruthless, and he wants to stop your journey. Where Ogleflow guides you with calm wisdom, Ruthless thrives on distortion and disorientation, offering misleading advice that feeds your insecurities. Instead of fostering growth and self-trust, he amplifies fear and inner turmoil, symbolizing the mental blocks and negative thoughts that hold you back from your true potential," he said, his voice trembling with an intensity that sent a chill through me. "What does he look like?" I asked, my voice barely audible, the flickering light from the corridor casting eerie patterns on the bars. He would have an unsettling, shadowy appearance with fragmented, shifting features that evoke a sense of unease. He blends in, he hides amongst. You may never see him, but his poisonous words will filter through to you, he said, his gaze distant, as if peering into a void only he could see, the air thick with an unspoken menace. A loud clang shattered the moment as the night watchman struck my cell's bars with his club, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. "Keep the noise down," he bellowed, his voice a harsh intrusion, the lantern at his side swinging wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the stone walls. I glanced at the neighboring cell, only to find the old man, Jeremiah as the watchman called him, slumped back on his bench, head against the bars, fast asleep, as if our conversation had been a fevered dream. The air in the cell felt heavier, the silence oppressive, broken only by the faint drip of water and the distant creak of the building settling. "Who is that?" I asked the watchman, nodding toward the old man, my voice trembling slightly. "That be old Jeremiah. Give him a penny and he'll tell your fortune, so they say." "Begging, I call it, and begging and thieving don't go round here," he said with a sneer, his lantern casting a sickly glow on his weathered face. "What's going to happen to me?" I asked, dread pooling in my chest, the cell's damp chill seeping into my bones. "The magistrate will decide in the morning. Now shut up and keep quiet," he growled, turning and stomping out, his boots leaving faint echoes in the corridor, the lantern's light fading until the darkness reclaimed the room. I sank onto the bench, the wood creaking under my weight, and leaned back against the damp, moss-slicked wall, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The cell's air was thick, each breath tasting of mold and despair, the faint light from the high window casting a lattice of shadows across the floor. I glanced at Jeremiah, his snores barely audible, and thought of his vivid description of Ogleflow, so poetic and precise. Bitterness crept into my thoughts, and I muttered under my breath, "Ogleflow, the one that promises paradise and delivers hell. Ogleflow, the one who leaves his friends to suffer. Ogleflow, the one that's never around when you need him. I'll tell you what you are, Ogleflow. You are a clown. That's what you are." "I found Jeremiah's description so much more poetic than yours, young fun," a familiar voice said, smooth and teasing, slicing through the cell's oppressive silence. I jolted upright, my heart leaping into my throat. There, sitting beside the sleeping Jeremiah in the next cell, was Ogleflow, his iridescent skin shimmering like liquid starlight, casting faint prisms on the stone walls. His eyes glinted with mischief, and a serene smile played on his lips, infuriatingly calm in the face of my predicament. I lunged at the bars, gripping them until my knuckles whitened, hissing through clenched teeth. "Where were you? And what are you doing in there?" "Why, I have been right here all along, young fun," he said, his voice a soothing melody that clashed with the cell's grim atmosphere, the air around him seeming to shimmer faintly. "But why are you in there?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over, the cold iron biting into my palms. "I must confess to a little subterfuge," Ogleflow said, with a chuckle that echoed softly, like wind chimes in a storm. "I wanted Jeremiah to deliver a message. He does it well, don't you think, young fun?" "What message? Was that you, singing your own praises through that old man?" I snapped, keeping my voice low to avoid the watchman's wrath, the damp air clinging to my skin. I was furious, the nickname Fun, a stinging reminder of how he found amusement in my struggles. The cell's shadows seemed to deepen, the walls closing in as my anger surged. I wanted to scream, to shake the bars until they bent, but I forced myself to stay quiet, my rage simmering beneath the surface. Ogleflow's laughter, light and unbothered, only fueled my resentment, the sound mingling with the distant drip of water. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I slumped back onto the bench, the wood groaning under my weight, defeated by the weight of my own emotions. In an instant, Ogleflow appeared beside me in my cell, his presence as sudden as a shadow shifting in the light, the air around him carrying a faint, otherworldly warmth. He sat on the bench, the wood creaking softly, and wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close, his shimmering skin casting faint glimmers on the stone wall. Despite my anger, I couldn't stay mad at him for long. He was my only friend in this strange, unforgiving world, a beacon in the darkness of my fear. Why do you always laugh at me? I asked, my voice small and weary, the cell's chill seeping into my bones. Have you seen yourself when you get mad, young fun? You look ridiculous, all puffed up, waving your arms around. How can I not laugh? He said, his tone warm but teasing, his laughter a soft counterpoint to the cell's oppressive silence. Remember, young fun, it's your choice to be mad. But I can't help it. It just happens, I protested, my breath visible in the cold air. Nothing just happens, young fun. You relinquish control of your mind to your ego, and the ego only knows how to defend and attack. Be vigilant. Ruthless will poison your mind, and you won't even see him coming, he warned, his voice growing serious, the air around him seeming to pulse with intent. Who is he? I asked, my curiosity piqued despite my frustration, the cell's shadows lengthening as if in response. He is a flochi, energy in motion, Ogleflow said, his words measured, each one landing like a stone in still water. He is a flochi like you, I replied, trying to piece together the puzzle, the damp wall at my back grounding me. Not like me, young fun. I am positive energy, and he is negative energy. I teach how to be. He teaches how not to be. I will show you your power. He will take it from you, he said, his gaze steady, his shimmering presence a stark contrast to the cell's grim reality. Have you seen him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the air growing colder, as if the mention of ruthless chilled the room. Positive and negative energy cannot occupy the same space, young fun. We are like two faces of a coin. Spin it, flip it as much as you like, show it a mirror, it will only ever see itself, he explained, his words heavy with meaning, the faint light from the window casting his features in sharp relief. Then how do you know he exists if you can't see him? I pressed, the cell's oppressive atmosphere pressing down on me. I see the effect he has on your mind, young fun. These scenarios we are moving through are his creations. Every negative thought, every negative reaction you have adds energy to his creations. He cannot create without you, and he will do all he can to keep you in a negative state of mind. I am on this journey with you to help you take back your power, he said, his voice a beacon of calm, cutting through the cell's despair. I don't understand. If you can't occupy the same space and these are his creations in my mind, how come you are here? I asked, my brow furrowing, the damp air clinging to my skin. He almost had you completely imprisoned in misery, young fun. But then you had a single thought, there must be a better way. That created a crack in your mind, just big enough for me to push through. And now I am here to show you that way, he said, a faint smile playing on his lips, his iridescent skin casting a soft glow. But you haven't shown me anything. All I've been doing is running for my life, I said, frustration creeping back, the cell's shadows seeming to pulse with my anger. We are traveling through the world you have created, young fun. Even now, in this situation. This is your fear of being trapped, unable to escape your misery, he said, his voice gentle but firm. And tomorrow you will be in front of the magistrate, which is created by your fear of having no control over your destiny. These are blocks within your mind that we must pass through to get to the core of the problem. So these blocks were created by me from negative energy. Negative thoughts, I asked, struggling to grasp the concept, the cell's damp chill seeping deeper into my bones. In league with ruthless, young fun. In short, you are your own enemy. You just don't know it. Humans have a choice. You have a choice. In any subject, you can choose to create from positive or negative energy. That is the only choice, really, he said, his words echoing in the confined space, the air heavy with their weight. I sat in silence, wrestling with Ogleflow's words, each one a riddle wrapped in enigma. They were profound, yet elusive, slipping through my grasp like smoke. At my age, with so little life experience, they felt like a puzzle I wasn't equipped to solve. Looking back, I see now that Ogleflow was guiding me toward a new way of thinking, revealing the world I'd built through my fears and doubts. But in that moment, I felt like a victim, not a creator, lost in a narrative that seemed to twist and turn beyond my control. I glanced at Jeremiah, still asleep, his snores a faint rhythm in the darkness, and a question surfaced. Why did you speak through that old man? I asked, my voice low, the cell's air thick with anticipation. 2 reasons really, young fun. 1, I wanted to have a bit of fun with you, he said with a playful grin, his eyes twinkling like stars. And two, I wanted to show you that weak-minded people can be used by negative outside entities to deliver messages, to sow seeds of doubt. So Jeremiah can't tell your future then? I asked, the cell's shadows seeming to retreat slightly in Ogleflow's presence. No, young fun. He is just a sick old man filled with regret, who drinks to hide from his sorrow, Ogleflow said, his tone softening with pity, the air around him carrying a faint warmth. How did he end up this way? I asked, genuinely curious, the cell's oppressive atmosphere easing slightly. Good question, young fun. He chose to create through negative thought patterns, and creating from negative energy will drain you. Whereas creating through positive energy, positive thought patterns, will invigorate you. Choose wisely, young fun. It's not easy to turn it around, as you are finding out, he said, chuckling lightly, the sound a brief reprieve from the cell's gloom. A sudden idea struck me, a spark of hope in the darkness. Hey, what if there's a key to the door in my bag of tricks? We could get out of here, I said, excitement bubbling up, my fingers itching to explore the bag's contents. Why don't you look, young fun? The bag will always give you what you need, Ogleflow replied, his eyes twinkling with amusement, the air around him shimmering faintly. I eagerly untied the bag of tricks from my back and unrolled it across the filthy cell floor, its contents glinting like treasures in the dim light. With a surge of anticipation, I plunged my hand inside, my fingers brushing against soft fabric. To my dismay, I pulled out a pillow, its surface worn but clean. Ogleflow burst into laughter, the sound echoing off the stone walls, bright and unrestrained. You obviously need to get some rest, young fun, he said, still chuckling, his mirth a stark contrast to the cell's grim reality. He was right. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me, my limbs heavy, my eyelids drooping. I was too tired to muster annoyance at his amusement, the cell's damp chill sapping my strength. Ogleflow stood, his shimmering form casting faint prisms on the walls, and I tossed the pillow onto one end of the bench, the wood creaking as I lay down. He draped the bag of tricks over me like a blanket. As I drifted into sleep, I grumbled under my breath about how Ogleflow, and now the bag of tricks, seemed to conspire to make me look foolish, the cell's shadows softening as sleep claimed me. I was jolted awake by the harsh clang of the night watchman's club against the bars, the sound like a thunderclap in the confined space. Rise and shine, he shouted, his voice dripping with malice, the lantern at his side casting grotesque shadows that writhed across the walls. Time to see the magistrate. Two dishevelled henchmen, their clothes stained with grime and reeking of sweat, accompanied him. They unlocked Jeremiah's cell first, dragging the old man out as he mumbled incoherently, his eyes glassy with confusion, his frail frame trembling. He cried out weakly, his voice a pitiful wail, as they hauled him away, his tattered shoes scraping against the stone floor. The night watchman turned to my cell, unlocking the door with a grating screech that echoed in the corridor. I scrambled to roll up my bag of tricks, my fingers fumbling with the ties, and slung it across my back. He grabbed me by the scruff of my neck, his fingers digging painfully into my skin, and marched me out of the building onto the bustling street, the air sharp with the scent of wood smoke and baking bread. Ahead loomed a grand, imposing building, its massive wooden double doors carved with intricate patterns of vines and beasts, their surfaces polished to a dark sheen. Above them, a stone relief depicted a sword and shield, the words "defend and execute" etched deeply into the shield's surface, a chilling testament to the justice within. The street outside was alive with a raucous crowd, their faces twisted with curiosity and scorn, their voices a cacophony of jeers and shouts. They shoved and poked at me, their hands rough and invasive, as the watchman forced his way through, his grip unyielding, the cobblestones slick underfoot from the morning's dew. Once inside, the heavy doors slammed shut with a resonant boom, muffling the crowd's clamor, the air growing still and heavy with the scent of polished wood and candle wax. The watchman hurried me down a long, dimly lit corridor, its stone walls lined at intervals with armed guards, their armor glinting faintly in the torchlight, their faces stern and unyielding. The corridor's air was cool, tinged with the faint metallic tang of iron and the musty scent of old stone. Ahead, I caught glimpses of poor Jeremiah, his frail form sagging between the two henchmen dragging him forward, his tattered clothes flapping like rags. He pleaded desperately, his voice cracking with terror, but his words were ignored, swallowed by the corridor's oppressive silence. Pity welled up in me for the old man, so lost and bewildered, his fear a palpable weight in the air. I was scared too, my heart pounding like a drum, but some part of me clung to the hope that this ordeal wouldn't end in death. The corridor's torchlight cast flickering shadows that seemed to dance with my fear. As we neared the corridor's end, the sound of laughter and shouting grew louder, a chaotic chorus that set my nerves on edge, the air growing warmer, thicker with the scent of sweat and anticipation. Two guards flanked a heavy oak door, its surface scarred and polished, one swinging it open with a creak as Jeremiah, then I, were ushered through. A narrow wooden staircase lay before us, its steps worn smooth by countless feet, the air growing stale and heavy. With each step upward, the noise intensified, a cacophony of jeers and mockery that seemed to press against the walls. The staircase's timbers groaned under our weight. We emerged into a cavernous oak-paneled chamber, its walls adorned with dark wooden beams that seemed to absorb the light, creating a perpetual twilight. High above, large leaded glass windows, their panes thick and warped, allowed only slivers of grey daylight to filter through, casting a patchwork of shadows across the polished wooden floor. Before us stood a massive wooden bench, its surface scarred and gleaming, behind which sat a high-backed chair, its carved surface adorned with intricate patterns of vines and skulls, a throne of judgment. Torches and candles flickered along the walls, their flames casting eerie, shifting shadows that danced like spectres, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning pitch, melted wax, damp wood, and the sour tang of nervous sweat. Wooden benches lined the chamber's sides, packed with spectators whose faces glowed with cruel amusement, their laughter a harsh, grating chorus. Among them, a loud, buxom woman stood out, her voice booming like a cannon as she cracked crude jokes at our expense, her words whipping the crowd into a frenzy, her bright, garish clothing a stark contrast to the chamber's somber tones. Poor Jeremiah, barely able to stand, leaned heavily on the two henchmen, constables, I later learned, who propped him up like a broken puppet, his eyes darting wildly, his breath ragged. The room fell silent as the magistrate entered through a door behind the bench, his presence a cold wind that seemed to still the air. He was a tall, stern figure, his angular face set in a permanent scowl, his eyes like chips of flint. He was dressed in a long black robe trimmed with dark fur, the fabric swallowing the light, and a stiff white ruff framed his neck like a collar of judgment, giving him an air of unyielding authority. He settled into the high-backed chair, the wood creaking under his weight, and struck the bench with his gavel, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. "This court is in session," he declared, his voice booming with a gravitas that seemed to shake the very walls, the air growing heavier with anticipation. Court clerks bustled about, shuffling papers with practiced efficiency, their quills scratching faintly, while the constables lining the room snapped to attention, their armor clanking softly. A clerk handed the magistrate a document, its parchment yellowed and crinkled, and he scanned it briefly before fixing his gaze on Jeremiah, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Jeremiah, you stand accused of begging. What say you?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "I wasn't begging, Your Honor," Jeremiah replied, his voice frail and halting, each word a struggle. "I tell people's fortunes for a penny. It's a service, Your Honor." "What evidence do we have that this man was begging?" the magistrate asked, his tone impatient, his fingers drumming on the bench. The night watchman, still gripping my neck, cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the silence. "Your Honor, I came upon Jeremiah sitting outside a tavern. He stretched out his hand and asked me for a penny, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but tinged with disdain. "Guilty of begging," the magistrate pronounced, slamming his gavel down with a force that seemed to reverberate through the chamber, the sound mingling with the faint crackle of torches. The constables dragged Jeremiah toward a door at the back of the chamber, his feeble cries for his mother piercing the air, a heart-wrenching, pitiful sound that made my stomach churn, the chamber's air growing colder, heavier with the weight of his despair. The door remained open, revealing a raised platform inside, its details obscured by the top of the doorway, the wood scarred and splintered. I could only see feet shuffling on the platform, accompanied by Jeremiah's soft sobbing, the sound echoing faintly in the chamber. Then, without warning, he dropped, a sickening snap reverberating through the room, sharp and final, as he swung gently from a rope around his neck, his body limp and lifeless, his tattered clothes fluttering slightly in the draught. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the scent of fear and death, the torchlight casting grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe in silent judgment. Shock rooted me to the spot, my eyes wide, my mouth agape, the world narrowing to the sight of Jeremiah's swaying form. My heart thundered in my chest, each beat a painful reminder of my own fragility, my breath shallow and ragged. The chamber's walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with the weight of what I'd just witnessed, the faint crackle of torches and the distant drip of wax the only sounds. The buxom woman leapt to her feet, her voice shattering the silence like glass. "I bet he didn't see that coming," she shouted, her words dripping with cruel mirth, prompting a wave of laughter from the crowd, their voices a harsh, grating chorus that echoed off the oak-panelled walls. The magistrate's gavel crashed down, silencing the room with a thunderous crack. "Order!" he roared, his glare pinning the woman like a moth. "One more outburst from you, and you'll find yourself in the dock before me." "Yes, Your Honor." "Sorry, Your Honor," she mumbled, sinking back into her seat, her bravado deflated, her garish clothing seemed to dim in the chamber's somber light. As she sat, I caught sight of Ogleflow behind her, his shimmering form unmistakable, his iridescent skin casting faint prisms that danced on the wooden benches. My frustration surged. He was here, yet doing nothing to help, his presence a mockery in the face of my fear. His serene smile only deepened my anger, as if he were enjoying the spectacle as much as the jeering crowd. The chamber's air grew thick with my resentment. The clerk handed the magistrate another document, its parchment crinkling softly. "Finn, you are accused of begging and thievery." "What say you?" he said, his eyes boring into me, cold and unyielding, like the stone walls around us. "I'm not a thief or a beggar, Your Honor," I replied, my voice trembling but defiant, the chamber's oppressive atmosphere pressing down on me. "What evidence do we have that this boy is a beggar and thief?" the magistrate asked, his tone sharp, his fingers tapping impatiently. The night watchman cleared his throat again, the sound grating in the silence. "I asked him if he was an orphan, and he said he was, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, his grip on my neck tightening slightly. "Guilty," the magistrate declared, his gavel striking the bench with a resounding crack, the sound echoing like a death knell. "All orphans are beggars and thieves." "But I'm not a thief," I shouted, terror clawing at my chest, as visions of the noose flashed before my eyes, the chamber's torchlight flickering as if in mockery. A stray thought slithered into my mind. How did you come by that bag of tricks, then? And a flush of guilt warmed my cheeks, the air growing hotter, heavier with my shame. The magistrate banged his gavel once more, the sound sharp and final. "To show that this court is not heartless, if anyone here will take responsibility for this boy, we will spare his life," he announced, his voice carrying a faint, mocking benevolence. The room fell silent, the air so still you could hear the faint crackle of candles and the distant creak of the building settling. I looked to Ogleflow, desperation in my eyes, but he remained still, his shimmering form a quiet presence. Then, with a subtle movement, he lifted his foot and nudged the buxom woman forward, propelling her out of her seat with a force that seemed to ripple through the air. She stumbled, confusion etched on her face, her garish clothing rustling as she caught herself, the magistrate's gaze fixing on her like a hawk. "Well?" he barked, his voice a whip crack. Fearing punishment, she stammered, "I will take him, Your Honor." Her words reluctant, tinged with fear, the chamber's air grew tense with her hesitation. "Give him to the woman," the magistrate ordered, his gavel striking once more, the sound final echoing off the oak-panelled walls. The night watchman marched me to her side, releasing his grip with a shove, the sudden freedom jarring. "He is your responsibility now," he said gruffly, his voice a low growl, the chamber's torchlight casting his shadow long and menacing. Her expression was one of reluctant obligation, her eyes flickering with uncertainty, and I wasn't exactly overjoyed either, but relief washed over me like a cool wave. I wouldn't hang. The chamber's air seemed to lighten slightly, though the weight of the crowd's scrutiny remained, their whispers a soft undercurrent. Ogleflow had vanished again, no doubt chuckling somewhere in the shadows, his absence a familiar sting. I vowed to give him a piece of my mind the next time I saw him, though I knew it would likely amuse him more than anything else, the thought a bitter spark in the chamber's oppressive atmosphere. The woman towered over me, her presence imposing, yet softened by an unexpected warmth in her eyes, like a hearth-fire in a storm. Well, you are my responsibility now, so let's get one thing straight. You do as you're told, when you're told. If you can do that, then we should get along just fine, she said, her voice firm but laced with a surprising gentleness that cut through the chamber's lingering tension, her words a lifeline in the sea of hostility. What do I call you? I asked, my voice small, the air still heavy with the scent of wax and sweat. My name is Belinda, but people around here call me Belle, she replied with a faint smile, her eyes softening further, a flicker of kindness in the chamber's grim light. I later learned they called her Big Belle, though never to her face, a whispered nickname that carried both affection and awe in the town's shadowed corners. Belle owned and ran a lively tavern by the docks, a weathered, timber-framed building with sagging beams and a sign that creaked in the salty sea breeze, its faded paint depicting a mermaid clutching a tankard. Inside the tavern was a warm, bustling haven, its air thick with the scent of roasted meat, spilled ale, and burning tallow candles. The main room was alive with raucous laughter and the off-key singing of sailors, their voices mingling with the clink of tankards and the crackle of a roaring fire in a massive stone hearth, its flames casting a golden glow across the scarred wooden tables. The walls, adorned with nautical relics, rusted anchors, frayed nets, and a cracked ship's wheel, seemed to pulse with the tavern's heartbeat, each creak of the floorboards a testament to its enduring spirit. Belle put me to work in the kitchen, a cramped, steamy space where the air was heavy with the aroma of simmering stews and baking bread, the walls blackened from years of smoke. I scrubbed crusted dishes until my hands were raw, the iron pots heavy and unyielding, and mopped floors slick with spilled grease and ale, the rough bristles of the brush scraping against the uneven planks. The labor was grueling, my back aching and my fingers pruned by day's end, the kitchen's heat a relentless companion. In those quiet moments, my thoughts drifted to Auntie Em, her tireless efforts now a poignant memory, and a pang of guilt struck me for how little I'd appreciated her, the kitchen's clamor fading as regret settled in my heart. A swinging door, its hinges squeaking with every push, separated the kitchen from the tavern's main room, a threshold Belle had made me swear never to cross. I had no desire to break that promise. This wasn't like the cozy tavern back home, with its gentle storytelling and warm familiarity. This place was rough, its air thick with the shouts of drunken sailors, the crash of overturned tables, and the shattering of glasses. The violence beyond the door was a world I wanted no part of. A chaotic symphony of brawls and debauchery that echoed through the walls, a stark contrast to the kitchen's relative calm. Belle was good to me in her own way, a towering figure of strength and warmth amidst the tavern's chaos. True, I worked hard for my keep, my hands calloused and my body weary, but she ensured I was well fed, my plate piled high with hearty stews, crusty bread, and the occasional sweet pastry snatched from the oven. She gave me a small cot in a corner of the storeroom, its walls lined with sacks of flour and barrels of ale, a safe haven from the tavern's nightly revelry. The cot was narrow, its straw mattress prickly, but it was mine, and Belle's quiet vigilance shielded me from the debauchery beyond the swinging door, her protective presence a steady anchor in the storm. As a hostess, Belle was unmatched, jolly and quick-witted, her laughter a booming melody that filled the tavern, her quick jests and bawdy humor drawing roars from the patrons. She moved through the crowd like a ship in full sail, her garish skirts swirling, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she traded barbs with sailors and merchants alike. She was the heart of the tavern, and it seemed to thrive on her spirit, just as she drew strength from its vibrancy, the two intertwined like the roots of a potted plant. But in the rare moments when the tavern emptied and the work was done, Belle would sit at the kitchen table, puffing on her pipe, the sweet, earthy scent of tobacco curling through the air, her eyes distant and heavy with unspoken sorrow. Shadows played across her face, the flickering candlelight revealing lines etched by time and hardship. In those moments, I saw the mask slip. She wasn't just the jolly landlady, she was a woman carrying a quiet, aching sadness, her vibrant exterior a shield against a heart worn thin by life's cruelties. One evening, as she sat lost in thought, the kitchen quiet save for the faint crackle of the dying fire, I gathered my courage and joined her at the table, the rough-hewn wood cool beneath my hands. "Are you all right, Belle?" I asked softly, my voice barely disturbing the stillness. She turned to me, her eyes softening with a warmth that caught me off guard, like a hearth fire in a winter storm. "You know, Finn, when I was a young girl about your age, I dreamed of living on a farm," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia, her gaze drifting to some distant memory. "I imagined marrying a handsome man, raising a big family, 3 boys and 3 girls. I always loved children and animals. But no handsome man came calling, and there was no farm. It was just a foolish girl's dream." A tear glistened in her eye, catching the candlelight before she brushed it away, hoping I hadn't noticed, the air heavy with her unspoken grief. "How did you end up here?" I asked, sensing the weight of her story, the kitchen's warmth unable to dispel the chill of her past. Her expression faltered, and I felt the pain radiating from her, a heartbreak she kept locked away behind her boisterous facade. Before she could retreat, I reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture surprising us both, her skin warm and calloused beneath mine. She placed her other hand atop mine, her thumb gently stroking my skin, grounding us in the quiet moment, the kitchen's shadows softening around us. "You're a sweet boy, Finn," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, thick with emotion. "Let's just say a series of unfortunate events landed me here. You can tell me, please, I want to know," I urged, my eyes locked on hers, the air thick with anticipation. She hesitated, then met my gaze, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, the candlelight casting a soft glow on her weathered face. She told me of her youth, how at 16 her father fell gravely ill and died, leaving her and her mother destitute, their savings drained by doctors and futile treatments. They were penniless, alone in a world that offered no mercy. Her mother took work at this very tavern, a place of rough men and rougher nights, where the lecherous landlord preyed on their vulnerability, exploiting both her mother and her. When her mother passed soon after, Belle was left alone, a young girl at the mercy of the landlord's advances. She learned to survive by wearing a brave face, burying her pain beneath a performance of strength, her laughter a shield against the darkness. The landlord eventually proposed marriage, and with no family or options, she felt trapped into accepting, the weight of her choice a lifelong burden. Years of abuse followed, and she coped by retreating into a persona, playing the part of the jolly landlady while her heart remained that of the girl who dreamed of a loving home, the tavern's clamour a constant reminder of her lost dreams. In time, the landlord's health deteriorated, consumed by drink and madness, until he was no longer a threat, his mind unravelling like the frayed ropes in the tavern's decor. "What happened to him?" I asked, a chill running through me, the kitchen's warmth unable to dispel the weight of her words. "You saw him, Finn, swinging from that rope," she said quietly, her voice heavy with finality, the memory a shadow across her face. "Jeremiah," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a blow, the courtroom's chaos flashing through my mind. "Jeremiah," she echoed, her voice a hollow echo, the air thick with the weight of her confession. Suddenly, her behavior in the courtroom made sense. The venom in her words, the way she'd whipped the crowd into a frenzy, her laughter a weapon aimed at the man who'd stolen her youth. It wasn't me she despised, it was Jeremiah, the architect of her pain, his execution a bitter catharsis. "Maybe I'll sell this place and get us a little farm." "What do you say to that, Finn?" she said, a spark of hope flickering in her eyes, her voice soft with possibility. "I'd like that," I replied, warmed by the thought of her finding peace, the kitchen's fire crackling softly, a quiet promise of new beginnings. "You know, Finn, When the magistrate asked if anyone would take responsibility for you, I was hoping someone would stand up. I don't know what made me jump up. I didn't want to bring you to this place and have you suffer as I did. But I'm glad I did, she said, her smile genuine and warm, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. A loud banging erupted from the tavern's entrance, the sound sharp and urgent, shattering the moment like glass. Belle's face tightened with worry, her eyes darting toward the swinging door. "Stay here," she ordered, rising and hurrying through, her skirts rustling, her usual warmth replaced by a distracted urgency, the kitchen's air growing tense with her absence. Curiosity and concern drew me to the door, my promise to Belle warring with my worry. I pressed my ear against the wood, its surface cool and worn, straining to hear. Belle's voice was raised, arguing heatedly with what sounded like three men, their tones gruff and insistent, their words muffled but laced with menace, the tavern's usual warmth replaced by a chilling undercurrent. "You shouldn't be listening at the door, young fun," came Ogleflow's voice, smooth and teasing, slicing through the kitchen's tension like a blade. I spun around, my heart racing, the air shimmering faintly with his presence. There he was, lounging at the table, his iridescent skin catching the firelight, casting prisms that danced on the blackened walls. I'd promised myself I'd unleash my anger on him the next time I saw him, but before I could, he pressed a finger to his lips, shushing me, his eyes twinkling with mischief. I tried to hold it in, but my frustration erupted in a silent tantrum, my face flushing red as I waved my arms in suppressed fury, the kitchen's shadows seeming to pulse with my rage. His quiet laughter, light and unbothered, only stoked my anger, and I realized he always appeared when I had to stay silent, as if orchestrating these moments to provoke me, the fire's crackle a mocking accompaniment. Taking deep breaths, I regained control, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and stew. "Where have you been?" I demanded in a harsh whisper, my voice barely audible over the muffled argument beyond the door. "I am always with you, young fun. We are on this journey together," he said, his tone infuriatingly serene, his shimmering form a stark contrast to the kitchen's earthy warmth. "I don't see you mopping floors or cleaning dishes," I shot back, my voice laced with resentment, the rough table beneath my hands grounding me as I gripped it tight. Ogleflow laughed, the sound bright and unrestrained, echoing off the kitchen's low ceiling. "This is your mess, young fun. I can't clean it up for you. I can only guide you and help you move forward," he said, his words sinking in like stones in still water. His words stirred a realization. These were my creations, my fears, my doubts, my struggles, reflected in the tavern's chaos and Belle's pain. The thought unsettled me, as it meant I was starting to see the world through Ogleflow's perspective. A shift I wasn't sure I welcomed. The kitchen's fire cast long shadows that seemed to mirror my inner turmoil. "Why are you here now?" I asked, wary, the air growing heavier with anticipation. "It's time to move on, young fun," he said, his voice gentle but firm, his eyes steady, cutting through the kitchen's warmth. "I can't go, not now. I can't just leave without saying goodbye to Belle." "She's been good to me," I insisted, my heart heavy at the thought of abandoning her, the fire's glow softening the edges of my resolve. "You won't like it if you stay longer, young fun," he warned, his tone carrying a quiet urgency, the air around him shimmering faintly. "No, I'm staying. I need to say goodbye. I know she'll be upset, but I can't just disappear," I said, resolute, the kitchen's warmth a quiet anchor against his words. "Very well, young fun." "So be it," Ogleflow said, and with a snap of his fingers, he vanished. The air stilling in his absence, the fire's crackle the only sound. For once I was glad to see him go, if only for a moment. The kitchen's quiet, a brief reprieve from his cryptic guidance. Belle returned, her face etched with worry, her eyes darting nervously. She hurried me off to bed, her usual warmth replaced by a distracted urgency. The storeroom's air cool and heavy with the scent of flour and ale. My cot was narrow, the straw mattress prickly, but I lay awake, my mind racing with thoughts of leaving Belle, the tavern's distant clamour a faint reminder of the world beyond. The next day the tavern buzzed with activity, a ship had docked, bringing a flood of sailors with coin to spend, their shouts and laughter filled the air like a storm. The kitchen was a whirlwind of steam and clatter, pots bubbled and dishes piled high, my hands raw from scrubbing, my back aching from the endless mopping. I had decided the best time to tell Belle I was moving on would be when the tavern closed, when we could be alone, the thought of hurting her a heavy weight in my mind. Her dream of a farm and family was beautiful, but it wasn't mine, and I knew I had to follow my own path. The kitchen's heat a constant reminder of my resolve to move on. The day crawled by, each task stretching endlessly, the air thick with the scent of sweat and spices, until at last the night drew to a close, the tavern's clamour faded to a hushed stillness. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the swing door, its hinges silent, waiting for Belle to appear, my heart pounding with anticipation. But the door remained still, and muffled noises from the tavern's main room sparked my concern, a faint clatter and low voices cutting through the quiet. I had never broken my promise to stay out of the main room, but worry for Belle overrode my hesitation. The kitchen's warmth urged me forward. Slowly, I pushed the swinging door open, its hinges creaking softly, letting the kitchen's golden light spill into the dim tavern, the air heavy with the stench of stale ale and sweat. 3 men stood like statues, their faces shadowed, each holding a drunken sailor slumped in their grip, their clothes tattered and faces flushed from too much drink. They were robbing them, preparing to shanghai them, their movements were swift and practiced. They glanced at me, but seeing only a boy, they continued their work, dragging the sailors toward the door, their boots scuffing the worn floorboards. Belle watched from the shadows, her face a mask of resignation, her eyes glinting with unshed tears, the tavern's firelight casting her in a somber glow. When the last sailor was loaded onto a cart outside, its wheels creaking under the weight, one of the men returned, his eyes narrowing as he noticed me, his face weathered and cruel. "Who's the boy?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. The air grew tense with his scrutiny. "He's my boy," Belle said firmly, stepping in front of me, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes, her skirts rustling as she squared her shoulders. The man tried to push past her, his intent clear, his hand reaching for me. Belle grabbed him, her strength surprised him, and they struggled, her nails digging into his arms. "You can't have him. He's my boy," she screamed, her voice raw with panic, her face contorted with desperation as she fought to protect me, the tavern's fire casting their shadows in a frantic dance. Time seemed to slow, each moment stretching like taffy, the air thick with the scent of smoke and fear. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, my limbs heavy with terror, the tavern's warmth unable to dispel the chill of the moment. A second man entered, his face obscured by the shadows, and he raised his club, its wood gleaming in the firelight. He struck Belle on the head with a sickening crack, and she crumpled to the floor, motionless, blood pooling around her, dark and glistening. The tavern's air grew cold and heavy with her silence. "I think you've killed her," one man said to the other, his voice cold, devoid of remorse, his words hung like a curse. They fled, their boots pounding the floorboards, the cart's wheels rumbling as they disappeared into the night. The tavern's door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoed like a gunshot. I stared at Belle's lifeless body, my mind refused to accept the sight, the tavern's firelight casting her in a cruel, unyielding glow. Her eyes were open, unseeing, her chest still, her face serene, yet empty. I knelt beside her, my hands trembling as I shook her gently, begging her to wake up, my voice breaking. But she didn't move, her warmth was already fading. Grief tore through me, a raw, searing pain that left me sobbing. My screams echoing in the empty tavern, the air thick with my anguish, the fire's crackle a mocking counterpoint. I sensed Ogleflow behind me, his presence a quiet weight, his shimmering form a faint glow in the shadows. Rage and sorrow surged through me, and I turned, pounding my fists against his body, screaming, "I hate you!" My tears soaked his iridescent cloths, the tavern's warmth unable to quell my pain. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me as I clung to him, my sobs racking my body, his embrace a welcome anchor in the storm of my grief. "We have to go," he said softly, his voice barely audible over my cries. The tavern's firelight flickered, as if in mourning for its lost soul. "I want to go home," I whispered, exhausted and broken, my voice a hollow echo, the tavern's air heavy with grief. This is a one-way street, Ogleflow said, his tone gentle but firm, his eyes steady. The only way home is to reach the other end. The spark of adventure that had fueled me at the journey's start was gone, replaced by a hollow ache, the tavern's warmth a cruel reminder of what I'd lost. Ogleflow lifted me gently, his touch warm and steady, and carried me outside, the night air sharp with the scent of salt and rain. He placed me on the back of a horse. "Rose, Mr. Summerfield's mare," I said with a start, her coat gleaming under the moonlight, her breath clouding in the chill air. "Indeed," Ogleflow said, climbing into the saddle, his movements quick and fluid, his shimmering skin catching the starlight. "The very same, young fun." He tugged on the reins, and Rose trotted down the cobblestone street, the rhythmic clop of her hooves a haunting echo of when I first met Ogleflow, the moment that set this journey in motion. The gentle sway of the ride and the late hour lulled me into reflection, the night air cool and heavy with the scent of wet earth and distant smoke. This wasn't real, not in the way I'd thought. I was back home, sitting on my bed, clutching a mushroom, exploring the depths of my mind. This tavern, this town, these people, all projections of my fears and hopes. Ogleflow was my guide through this inner landscape, leading me towards the memory of my mother, a pain I'd buried too deep to face, the cobblestone's gleam a mirror to my hidden grief. Ogleflow had said I feared love, and now I saw how my negative thoughts had grown, multiplying like weeds, each one feeding the world around me. Guilt gnawed at me, guilt for not leaving with Ogleflow when he urged, guilt that my delay had cost Belle her life. He'd warned I wouldn't like staying, but I never imagined this. The tavern's firelight a cruel reminder of my choices, its warmth now a distant memory. "Would Belle have died if I'd left when you first said?" I asked, my voice small, barely audible over the clop of hooves, the night air thick and heavy with my regret. "Death is life, and life is death, young fun," Ogleflow said, his tone cryptic, his words floating like mist over a still lake. The moonlight cast his form in a soft glow. "Can't you give me a straight answer, just this once?" I pleaded, my voice breaking, the air heavy with my desperation. "Belle had a dream, young fun. She couldn't reach that dream from where she was. So this life ended. Another begins," he said, his voice steady, his eyes distant, as if seeing beyond the night. "You mean she'll have the handsome man, the farm, the children?" I asked, hope flickering like a candle, the night air cool against my tear-streaked face. "Do you wish it so, young fun?" Ogleflow asked, his voice soft, his gaze piercing. "I do. With all my heart I do," I said, my voice breaking, the words a prayer, the moonlight a quiet witness. "Then it is so," Ogleflow said, his words carrying a quiet certainty, the air lightening with their promise, the cobblestones gleam a faint echo of hope. A weight lifted from my chest, joy piercing the grief like a ray of sunlight at dawn. This was my mind, my creation, and I could choose what to hold. From now on, I'd imagine Belle living her dream, free from the nightmare she'd endured, her laughter echoing in a sunlit field, her children's voices a joyful chorus. For the first time, I glimpsed what Ogleflow was teaching me, that life was a reflection of my thoughts and beliefs, the tavern's firelight a symbol of my power to shape my world. But my resolve wavered as a shout rang out behind us. Belle's body had been found, the cry shrill and accusing, cutting through the night like a sharp blade. Ogleflow spurred Rose into a trot. The town's lights faded as we entered the countryside. The air grew cooler, tinged with the scent of pine and damp grass. I glanced back, seeing torches flickering in the distance, their flames a fiery snake winding toward us, the sound of hooves and angry voices growing louder, a relentless tide. Fear surged through me, cold and sharp, as Ogleflow urged Rose into a canter. The road was rough and treacherous, its ruts hidden in the dark. The clouds above were thick and ominous, swallowing the stars. Lightning cracked across the sky, a jagged scar of light, and rain began to fall. First a light patter, then a torrential downpour, soaking my clothes and chilling my skin. I clung to Ogleflow, my heart racing, my fingers digging into his shimmering form, the mob's torches growing closer, their flames defiant against the storm. He kicked Rose into a gallop. The uneven ground jarred my bones. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at my hair. I didn't know what scared me more. Falling from Rose or being caught by the vengeful mob, the noose's shadow looming in my mind, the rain a relentless assault. The clouds darkened, lightning flashed wildly, illuminating the twisted branches of ancient oaks, their limbs clawing at the sky. Thunder roared, a primal bellow that shook the earth, the air thick with the scent of ozone and wet earth. Ogleflow veered off the road, guiding Rose up a grassy hill. The terrain was slick and uneven, the rain now a blinding sheet, obscuring the world beyond. The hill was steep. Rose's hooves slipped in the mud, her breath labored, her sides heaving with effort. At the crest, Ogleflow pulled her to a stop, her nostrils flaring, her coat slick with rain. The mob was climbing below, their torches were like a fiery serpent, their shouts rising above the storm, a chorus of rage and vengeance. "They're going to catch us," I cried, panic choking me, my voice lost in the wind, the rain stinging my face like needles. Ahead, a lightning flash revealed a monstrous vortex, a towering, twisting mass of wind and debris stretching from earth to sky, its roar a deafening cacophony like 1,000 freight trains bearing down. The air grew heavy, the pressure dropping, my ears popping as the wind yanked at my clothes, threatening to tear me from Rose's back. The night was thick with an unnatural stillness, a breathless pause before the storm's full fury erupted. A low guttural rumble built in the distance, growing into a monstrous roar that shook the ground, the air thick with grit and moisture, stinging my skin like shards of glass. In the darkness, I could barely see the vortex's twisting shadow, but I felt it, an immense devouring force, its power a living beast. Flashes of lightning revealed a churning blackness, its edges frayed and chaotic, swallowing trees and earth alike. My breath caught, my heart pounded as debris hurtled through the air, branches, stones, shards of wood, each a deadly missile in the night's fury. The tavern, the town, Belle's lifeless form, all seemed distant, swallowed by this primal chaos, the storm a manifestation of my own inner turmoil. "What the hell is that?" I screamed, my voice shredded by the wind, the rain a relentless torment, my eyes wide with horror. Ogleflow didn't answer, his shimmering form resolute, his eyes fixed on the vortex. He kicked Rose, and we charged toward it, the rain lashing like 1,000 whips, the wind a howling beast. I sobbed, curling into myself, my body trembling, desperate to escape the torture, the storm's roar drowning my cries. Lightning crackled inches away, its electric hiss deafening, a white-hot streak that singed the air. Thunder vibrated through my core, a bone-rattling boom that seemed to splinter the world. Suddenly, I was airborne, ripped from Rose, twisting and tumbling through the vortex's heart, the wind a merciless force. Lightning streaked past, its crackle a searing pulse, illuminating the chaos. Debris swirling, the sky fracturing, my body weightless, yet battered. A thunderclap shook my very soul, its resonance a final shattering note, and then darkness swallowed everything, a void as deep as my fear, pulling me into its silent, endless embrace.